So, welcome to the month of November. It's hard to believe, but it's already here, right? And this this evening, this afternoon into this evening, we will have Kirsten talking about. If I may change this real quick, talking about love's redemption from obsession to family ties. With no further ado, I'll pass the word to Kirsten.
Thank you, Leo. Good evening, everyone. Leo. All right. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning, depending on where you're listening to us online. We're good to go. Just checking in the back. Welcome, welcome. Love's redemption from obsession to family ties. Welcome. Once again, we can't call this a part two from our last session. However, there are some things we're bringing once again from this book, Facets and Patterns of Spirit Obsessions, that was psychographed by the Brazilian medium, Givaldo Franco, by the spirit Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, or as he's referred to in the book sometimes as Filomeno. Love's Redemption. Sounds like a nice title, we hoped. And perhaps you might be thinking, obsession and family ties, those two things don't seem to really mix. Well, they can, and it does and can happen. But today we're going to talk about it. We're going to explore some of Joanna DeAngelis' approach to family bonds and the forgetfulness of past lives. We're going to bring the case of Argos, Aria, and Philippe's case. And we're going to differentiate between the emotional memories from factual event recollections. And also at the very end, we'll be providing some of the references and also recommendations that we always like to make within the Spiritist arena of books, what can be read and studied and should be. All right, so we're familiar more or less with reincarnation, right? In Spiritist beliefs, we believe that we can reincarnate. We don't believe, as some religions do, where you can reincarnate back into an animal. We only believe in moving forward. So we believe that we have lived many lifetimes and many different existences and experiencing different things. And for us as Spiritists, we believe that these opportunities of reincarnation are opportunities where we get to strengthen our family ties, but also, as most of us know, the family and the opportunity to reincarnate in a family serves as a school for us. Whether we are the parent or child or siblings, it fosters, at least it lays down the opportunity for us to practice some moral growth. Now, we wanted to talk about this specific case, which will be the backbone of today's discussion when we talk about past lives, future lives, reincarnation, memory, forgetfulness of the past, and ultimately, how do we make the most out of this life that we are given, independent of what our story is. But this case study involves three people: Argos, Aria, and Philippe. It is the tale oldest time. It's the love triangle of about 5 centuries, if you can believe it. 5 centuries. Think about that. Think about how old you are right now. Think about your age. And think about how long in your mind it seemed to have taken from you to be a small child until now. I mean, it seems like a long time. Maybe it seems like an instant. But if you can imagine even longer. And imagine someone that you might have had a fight with or an argument with that might be still ongoing. But imagine holding that for 500 years. And we were talking not too long ago, and I believe it was in one of our study groups, about someone being able to overcome their trial or tribulation and forgive someone within 4 months. And we were sharing how it took us 8 years. And that seemed like forever. But 500 years, that's insane. In the 15th century, and I won't go into the nitty gritty details because there's not enough time for it in this lecture, but you can read the book. Please go and read the book. Argos and Aria and Philippe are intertwined throughout this entire book. They are the main characters of the book, although there are various cases that are revealed through Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, through the mediumistic hands of Divaldo Franco, but interwoven into most chapters is the story of Argos, Aria, and Philippe. Once upon a time, as the story goes, there was a beautiful woman and a loving husband, and they were in love. But like every story ever told, there was a villain, and he was jealous. He wanted the love that Felipe and Aria had. Oh, okay. He wanted the love that Philippe and Aria, this is Argos. So he did what any man of that time in the 15th century would do. He paid someone to murder Philippe. He kidnapped Aria and took him as his wife, took her as his wife. And over time, this scenario through many lifetimes repeated itself more or less. But eventually, Aria did actually learn to love the beast. Who's ever heard of the story of Beauty and the Beast? One person? Disney, Beauty and the Beast? Okay, all right. Kind of like that, but not really, but sort of. So several lifetimes, the same scenario happens twice that we know of in the book. Aria and Philippe get together, not just this life, in another life again, and Argos gets jealous. He's madly in love with Aria. What he says is love. So he has to have her. He said he cannot contain himself. So he kills Philippe. But 500 years later, Philippe, still in the spirit realm, with the hatred of 1,000 men in his heart, in present day, waits for Argos, for him to not only get sick, but ruin himself through his own mental imbalances. And he aggravates a disease, which in the early 1900s, which is when this book takes place, the early 1900s in the south of Brazil, where there was an outbreak of pulmonary tuberculosis. So Argos, long story short, he had pulmonary tuberculosis. He was going to die. He was near death. They do a very experimental surgery. They remove half of his lung. And he, believe it or not, he recovers with the help of these spirit doctors and spirit guides and all that kind of stuff. And they actually give him a moratorium of 5 years. I won't go into that. That's a whole other talk for a different day. It's absolutely fascinating. I've never heard of a spiritual transplantation like I did the way that Filomeno describes in this book, and it happened in the spirit realm. Very interesting. But Philippe follows him through this whole process and aggravates his illness and just continues to throw mental darts at him and hates him with a hatred that is so intense that Argos is so wrapped up in it that it's very difficult for him to leave this obsession. But here we have in this current life, he marries again Aria. Very much in love with her, but also still very much a prideful man and egotistical and selfish and only looks out for himself. Although, would you believe it in this life? Do you know what religion they're following? Take a guess. He's a spiritist. Yes. He's a spiritist. She's a spiritist. They both go to the center. And despite all that, Argos is still entrenched in his own selfishness. The spirits describe that Argos, he likes spiritism. He thinks it's great. He loves the idea of it and the philosophy, and he loves to talk about it. But the spirits say it never really translates to his inner self. He's not really able to fully put it into practice, although he has some merit. He is an okay person. But what do we think continues to happen? Well, the hatred eventually in this book comes to a head. You would think, finally, after 500 years. Has anyone read the book Liberation by André Luiz, Secretary by Chico Xavier? Libertação in Portuguese. Has anybody read it? Libertação in English or Liberation in Portuguese? In English? I think you did. Who remembers the story of Gregorio? Okay. How many years did he spend in the lower zones? A long, long time. And why was he in this? Why was he there? Does anyone remember? Dun, 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 dun. It was because of a woman. Tale as old as time. Oy. There's much to the story, but in essence, I digress. Argos and Aria in this life trying to do better. And there was Philippe consistently through this obsessive process. And they go into detail about the processes. It's fascinating. We talked about it a little bit in our previous talk. At the end, everything comes to a boil to a head. And the Sister Angelica, who's the high spirit that oversees the work that they're involved with Filomena de Miranda and other spirits, and they get together while Argos and Aria are sleeping, and they get Philippe and all three of them, and they have a meeting. And immediately, and I'm summarizing here, immediately, Argos recognizes Philippe, and he recognizes him in his image scares him, and he says, "Go away, you hellish ghoul." And Philippe's like, "Who are you calling a hellish ghoul? You put me in hell." And then Argos begins to remember, like flashback, all of the past lives. And Philippe goes on a rampage and just like this moment of pure catharsis. And Filomeno in the book looks to Sister Angelica like, are we going to intervene? We brought them together to have this conversation. And Sister Angelica, you could understand that they need this cathartic moment. Philippe needed to get some things off his chest, and Argos needed to hear it. So Philippe goes into this rant of saying, "You took away my happiness. You murdered me because you wanted my wife." And he said, "I could have forgiven you if you did it once, but you did it twice. Despicable. And you did the same thing to me. You murdered me, or you had me murdered. And you took away my wife, my love." And Argos, in this state of like, to put it in layman's terms, he's like, "Man, I didn't do it out of malice. I did it because I was crazy in my mind, in love with this beautiful woman, and I wanted her for myself. I didn't do the things that I did to hurt you. I did them because I was selfish." And he said, "Isn't it just time that can you forgive me? I know that I did these things to you, but can you forgive me?" And he said, I really don't know if I can." And actually, Philippe turns to Sister Angelica and he says, "And what if I don't have the strength to forgive him?" And she says, "God will give you strength because he is the fount from whence all goodness flows. Love finds resonance and receives a vitalizing charge in the same amount as that which is emitted by those who love." And he said, "I cannot see him happy. He doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve it after I suffered all this time. But through all of this, Argos says, please, Philippe, forgive me. And Philippe just said, I just don't know that I can. In this moment of desperation, and after 500 years, 500 years, Argos finally comes to this self-realization, and he prays with his whole heart. And up until this point, when he would pray, it was for selfish reasons. It wasn't fully because of faith. But he pleaded with God, and he said, help us, Celestial Father, in our madness. Talking about him and Philippe. Have pity on us, those involved in such regrettable situation of unsustainable hatred. Teach us the courage and love of Jesus in order for us to advance, however late, starting our journey on the pathway of the good. Have mercy on him and help him, and have pity on my weaknesses. And he goes on and on. He was unable to continue because he was filled with so much emotion, and he was filled with repentance, marked with the purpose of a just rehabilitation. That was the beginning. It was the end and the beginning of a new chapter for the three of them. And Aria, according to Philippe, was not an innocent victim. Philippe also blamed her and said, Argos, after he killed me, you end up loving him. How dare you? Why didn't you wait for me? Why didn't you do something? And she said, well, I wasn't able to kill myself, so I had to live, and I suffered. And they have this whole conversation. All this to say at the end, she prays as well and says, God, if only you could give me a child, because in this lifetime that they find themselves in this 19th century in Brazil, she's unable to conceive children. So she prays and asks God to allow her and Argos to have Felipe reincarnate and for them to find him somewhere in the world. And that's what ends up happening. Love prevails. Aria and Argos, one day, after much consideration, actually go to an orphanage full of children of all ages and sizes and backgrounds. And as she walks into the orphanage, she sees this little sickly little boy. Sickly, he's kind of like sad, and she has, because of their affinity, she has an immediate pull towards this little boy, and she says, that's my son. And it was Philippe reincarnated. So the rest is yet to be told in their story, but we wanted to utilize this story and to help us to understand that this story of Argos, Ari, and Philippe is all of our story. Just has different details, different variables, and whatnot in different situations. But it is our story. It is humanity's story. And thankfully, we get this opportunity when we look at our children or our grandchildren or our nieces or nephews, and with love in our hearts, hopefully with love in our hearts, because there are times where people can actually feel, and we'll talk about that in a minute, they feel this repulsion of their own children or of a niece or of a child, and that comes from the spiritual memory that we carry with us. But hopefully, with the forgetfulness of the past, we're able to embrace this new life that God has blessed us with, allowing us to begin again. And there is this understanding that we've talked about before, that although we don't have actual event recall, we don't remember the specifics of our past lives, but Joanna DeAngelis reminds us in several different books and in her works that although we won't have exact intellectual memory, we do have emotional memory. And that is what explains the repulsion or the affinity that we have with people, with our children. Like I said, it happens, it's an actual thing. And sometimes those traces of emotion will affect and influence our current lifetime. I remember a very dear person in our lives who had a very extensive mediumship, very rare kind of mediumship, and she was able to. She was clairvoyant. She could she had a lot of different types of mediumship, and one of the things that she was able to actually recall in detail some of her past lives, and some of those included her her husband, and she could vividly remember when the recall for her happened. And she says this story that she told us 1,000 years ago, that she went to Givaldo to confirm, and she said, Givaldo, I have this thing happened to me, and then I had this recall of this whole life I had my husband, and now I have such anger against him. But it's from a lifetime I barely remember. I just remember this incident where he harmed me. And it's hard for me to live because I love my husband dearly, but now I have this memory. And Givaldo said to her, my daughter, if you remember, if God's allowing you to remember, it's for a purpose. There's a reason. Search your soul for it. But he did validate that indeed her memory was legitimate, that Joanna confirmed that what she was recalling did happen in a past life with her and her spouse, and was influencing their current relationship. So these things do happen. It's real life. But we know that ultimately, despite what memories we have or we don't have, what emotions we feel or we don't feel, family and reincarnation is to help us to strengthen our family ties, it's to forgive, to redress, to love again with new eyes. Have you ever had a fight with a best friend? Have any of you? And if you're online, you also can answer this. Have you ever had someone who maybe they weren't a best friend, maybe they were just a close friend, maybe it was a close cousin, or it's just someone in your life you were close with and you had a fight with? You don't have to raise your hand, but think about that. And then after some time, you made up, and it was like you both just kind of agreed that the past is the past. Let's move on. It's always kind of in your mind, right? Like, you both know the argument you had, but you both mutually agree we're going to move on and live our lives still as best friends. That's kind of, in a way, how reincarnation is. It's a new opportunity for us to come together again, unite again, repairing any past conflicts, and really utilizing love and compassion. We know all this through Spiritism. You can read about it in the Gospel according to Spiritism. There's vast library now in English from Joanna DeAngelis. There's a book that's not yet in English called SOS Familia, which is also really good, packed with really good nuggets of knowledge. And Joanna talks about this also in Family Constellation, this impact on family relationships. This residual affection may attract spirits to reincarnate together to repair, learn, and forgive. So we can attract certain spirits to us, much like in one way, Aria was able to find Philippe, who needed to come as her son. The same way we can attract spirits to us who might even very well just be around us already. And in the case of Aria and Argos, he was their obsessor, which obsessor sounds very demeaning. Obsessors are nothing more than our victims from the past. We were the perpetrator, they were the victim. They're just coming back to get revenge. And once again, this emotional education, Joanna, more than anything else, talks a lot about emotionally educating ourselves. because that is key to having healthier relationships, not just with ourselves, which is extremely important. How I love myself, how I treat myself is very important, but also emotionally educating ourselves within our family groups, learning how to have interpersonal relationships, learning how to listen. That's an art form. Learning how to communicate. That's an art form. It takes study, it takes a desire and a will to get there. But once we're in the midst of it, as we all are in our families, all of us to some degree have challenges in our cell of society, which is our family. There is guidance. And there's a great book recently, the last year or 2 years, give or take, a book that was translated from Portuguese to English called Wake Up and Be Happy. You can get, I'm going to show a picture of the actual book. You can find it on Amazon. It's by Joanna and Givaldo, or Joanna, psychographed by Givaldo. And she talks about these clear guidances for healing and reconciliation. And she says, exercise forgiveness, patience, and charity within the home. There are too many stories in the Andrea Louise collection, in the Manuel Filomeno Miranda series, and other psychograph series. There are too many cases of spiritists, of Christians, of people who are follow a religion but do not apply it in their own homes. Let's do that. Let's exercise forgiveness, patience, and charity within the home. It is our laboratory. It is our opportunity. And gee whiz, let's all be honest, it is hard. It is super hard. It's difficult, it's challenging, but that's how it is. That is how it is sometimes. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. But how are we going to do any of this work if we're not self-aware? If we don't know where we stand on this continuum of life emotionally? Am I prepared? Do I have enough knowledge? Do I have enough resources? Do I know how to manage my own emotions when I get triggered, when I get upset? What are my triggers? Recently at work, we are doing utilizing this new tool, and it's called partnership mapping. And it's just really interesting. You can Google it. And it's just a way for healthcare providers to map out how their different healthcare partners communicate to one another. And you can build out this map to see how they communicate, how they data share, and all these kind of things. The point being in this mapping process is that you see where the gaps are in care. And I began thinking about this. Can I do this in my own life? Can I create a Kirsten map of how I'm interacting with people? Where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? If my ultimate goal is my self-actualized self, that's the goal, and this connection with God, how are my interactions with others in my current life? And mapping that out and see where my weaknesses are. But you don't have to do a mapping. You can just spend some time on self-discovery. Like the old saying is, you can't fix what you don't acknowledge. You just can't. And I have to be completely transparent with you all. Since beginning to study about a year or two ago, the books of Manuel Filomeno Miranda, his series, unlike Joanna, that brought a lot of comfort and insight and inspired me, these books scared me, but in a good way, if I can say that. Scared me because I thought, who am I? And who am I most like? Recently, Leo brought the parable Do you guys remember which parable it was? Prodigal son. Yeah. Of course you know, Leo. We know you know. Yeah. Parable of the prodigal son. And he asked a question talking about the prodigal son, the son that's there, and then the father, and then the servants in the story. Who do you identify with? And we find ourselves asking that question. Who do we identify with? And the most scary thing is how unaware these spiritists are in these stories. And as Philomena's telling in this story, as someone standing on the outside, much like when you're watching a game, it's very easy to judge and say, well, this player should go here and that player should go here. And you know, if anyone's ever watched a game and watch your husband saying, oh, that player, da, 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 da. You know, it's so easy because you're not in the field. It's the same when Philomena is telling these stories. You're like, oh my gosh, why doesn't he wake up? Why doesn't he see it? Why don't they just see what's going on? Like, they have the knowledge. But then we take a step back and go, wait a second, isn't that me? Couldn't I also have blinders on? Where are my blind spots? You know, when you're driving a car, you have blind spots. Do you know where your car's blind spots are, by the way? I hope so, yeah. No, seriously, think about that. When you're driving, where are the blind spots in your car? And where are your spiritual blind spots? What are the things that you are really not aware of? Because from day to day, we think we are aware. We think we're doing pretty good. But in reality, there's a whole part of us that we may not be aware, things that we're doing that we're not really that aware of, ways in which we're hurting people that we're not really that aware of. And obsession, depending upon the degree and the specifics, can actually blind us from seeing the wrong that we're doing, the ways in which we're hurting others. It can blind us to that. Working on self-awareness is important. Cataloging, acknowledging what are our emotional patterns. For instance, I'm triggered when I get annoyed when. We should know what our triggers are and then ask ourselves why we have them. And aside from that spiritual work, educating ourselves morally. In 2001, which was, wow, that was like 24 years ago. Woo. I remember there were, I could count on two hands how many books were in English in the Spiritist library of the world that were officially translated, because some people will translate it on their own. There were less than 10. But in 2025, as of today, November 1st, I can no longer count hands and feet how many books from the Spiritist philosophy are now in English. There's too many to count. If you go on Amazon and you type in Givaldo Franco or Joanna DeAngelis, if you go on Leal Publisher or Feb Publisher, and many different other sites, I'm sure, there are a ton of books in English. So we have the resources. And the one thing that's interesting, both about healthcare that we have found over 15 years of being in it, is that it's not unlike humanities and how we interact. And healthcare system is made up of humans, right? That much like in the healthcare field, the problem often isn't lack of resources, because we can find ways to get patients resources. The biggest problem that exists in healthcare, that exists in humanity, is not getting people resources, but it is getting the people to want to leave their bad situations, because we are used to it. We get comfortable in it. It becomes the norm. And that if that is the truth, these don't make us bad people. They just make us unaware. And without properly educating ourselves morally and taking action, we stay in the same cycles. Argos, for 500 years, stayed in the same cycles. Gregorio, these are just two examples of people throughout history that we know from a spiritual perspective that have been repeating. So the question is, how long have you been in your cycle? How long have you, do you think, have been living the way you are today? Because there is this theory that we don't live many lifetimes. We have one life with multiple experiences. Just another way to look at it. We have one long life because we are immortal. And from one lifetime, from one existence to another, we have different personalities. We experience different things. One life I'm rich. One life I could be poor. Could be a successive amount of lifetimes where I'm a man. And then I go through the period of where I'm also a woman to have different experiences. But the question is, how long have I been where I am right now? And does that scare you or does that inspire you? Both. Daniel says both. It's both for me. Probably it scares me personally more than it inspires me. But fear can be a good inspirer or motivator. Thank you. As long as you don't stick with the fear, because fear can be very debilitating. But the fear of being stagnant, of being the same person for 500 years, and thinking about my mentor and thinking, oh gosh, how much work I give to them. Gee, golly gosh. Wow, they must look at me like, man, another century passed. Not much has changed. It's funny, but I worry about those things. I worry this lifetime I worry. Probably in all my other lifetimes I could care less. But this lifetime I think about that. Like, my God, I give her a lot of work. She has her hands full. God bless her. But as my children would say, those are the facts. Them's the facts. That's the reality. But like a good, loving friend and mentor, Sister Angelica, she gives us these wise words, these action items to take away. And they're super important, not just for the case of Argos and Ari, but for all of us, because we are them. We are those people, meaning we have our good parts and the parts that we have to work on. We have our strengths and we have our weaknesses that we need to work on. The point is for us not to feel bad about ourselves. Joanna DeAngelis and all the spirit mentors, and within Spiritism, is never a philosophy or a religion that wants us to feel guilty, but wants us simply to take responsibility and take action to repair what we've done and to move forward. That's key. Because what often happens is that once we realize the wrong we've done, we stay stuck in this loop of guilt. And some spirits, and there's been cases where they stay in this guilt loop for more centuries. So you spend 500 years doing all the bad, and then you come to the realization and you feel so guilty, you spend another 500 years in this cocoon of guilt. So it's one extreme or the other. So we have to find a balance where we acknowledge our misdeeds and just focus on the moving forward. As the Brazilians say, bola pra frente. Put the ball forward. I don't know, what would be the expression in English? Go on playing the game. Sure. Yeah, I like that. I like more ball goes forward. I think it's funnier, but yeah. So, but the point is, let's keep going. So Sister Angelica says, and this is the advice she gives to Philippe, to Aria, to Argos, and to us. She says, exemplify love and uplifting service, the first step towards overall deliverance. Let that sit with you for a moment. Exemplified love and uplifting service, the first step towards overall deliverance. Be the love. That's what exemplify means. Be the love that you want to have, that you wish to have. And be the good that you want others to practice towards yourself, towards you. Be that person. And here she reminds us, so important, never fear, whatever the situation might be. Fear is the enemy of peace. There's a book, No Solar. It's the first in the series when Chico Xavier was psychographing and Andre Luis was psychographing through him. No Solar is the first of 16 books in the series, Life in the Spirit Realm. And in that book, do you guys remember what they said about fear? It's okay if you don't. But fear, they tell us in No Solar, is so debilitating that there are loads of spirits that come back to the spirit realm that have to go through a re-education process to learn how to let go of fear. Fear holds us back. Fear has its place in space and time as animals. But as thinking beings, through our evolutionary process, we are told, never fear whatever the situation may be. Fear is the enemy of peace. How do you not have fear when it's so ingrained in us for centuries? From the animal kingdom, which we're still in, but as human beings, for centuries and centuries and centuries, it's so ingrained in us. Practicing having faith is one of those things. Practicing in the moment when we feel that fear is to replace it with something positive, like the thoughts of faith, trusting in God. Some action items. She tells us, set immediate goals until step by step you reach the ultimate target, which is your happiness. Joanna talks about this. Actually, and Givaldo Franco often, he mentioned this a lot, especially in the last years. Setting goals for your life. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can be 78, you can be 99, you could be 10, you could be 15, you could be whatever age you are. Have goals in your life. Step by step, write them out, what your goals are and how you plan to achieve them. They help us stay focused on what our plan is. And she reminds us, the harm done to you should not deserve a response, so that it does not in turn produce greater evils. Why did she say that? Because it had been so many centuries. And she turns to Philippe, who complains that he was murdered not once but twice by Argos, and his wife stolen from him. Sister Angelica, I'm going to say in layman's terms, she says it very beautifully in the book, but essentially she turns to him and says, Philippe, if you look at your past lives further back than the 15th century, you were not an angel. There was a reason why you went through what you went through. Not saying that Argos had every right or that it was justified for him to kill you, but you also had a lot of debts. You're not the innocent person you portray yourself to have been. So here she's saying someone has to end the cycle. Someone has to stop. Like the chicken or the egg, it doesn't matter who came first. Let's just be the one, let's be the cycle breaker. Let's be that person that it says, it ends with me. And of course, always find support in prayer and in work. This is important. Find support in prayer. Prayer that you are praying fervently, faithfully, humbly from the depths of your soul. She reminds us a mind illumined by prayer and sentiments, bound to duty and service, might be besieged by the forces of spirit obsessions, but will never fall into the hands of tenacious persecutors. A mind illumined by prayer and sentiments, bound to duty and service, might be besieged by the forces of spirit obsessions, but will never fall into the hands of tenacious persecutors. So in layman's terms, she says, if you are prayerful and those prayers illuminate your sentiments, and you are engaged and bound to through commitments of duty and service, meaning doing good for others, living a disciplined life, you may still have obsessors around you, but you will never fall into their hands. Because through prayer, discipline, and diligence towards work of the good, any good work, we elevate our vibration. We elevate ourselves. And Givaldo used to share, Chico as well, about the obsessors that followed Givaldo for 20, 30 years. The man in the iron mask, as the famous story that he tells. Always this spirit obsessor lay in waiting for him to mess up at any moment. But after 30 years, imagine this obsessor being around him. Finally, he changed his mind on one particular day when Givaldo, at the beginning of when the earlier years of the Mansion of the Way in Brazil, when he was taking in children off the street, there was one particular baby that was brought to him. She was very disfigured. Someone had dumped her in a dumpster, and someone had brought her to the Mansion of the Way. And the workers brought the baby to Givaldo and said, Givaldo, we don't have space for this baby. We are inundated with so many needs of the children and babies that we already have. We can't take one more. Like, how are we going to feed her? We barely can feed the ones that we have. So the workers wanted to give her to some other organization or just give her to the police or whatever it was. But Givaldo sat there and looked at this baby who was hideous because of her deformities. And he loved her and made the decision that he was going to take her in, despite not having the resources. And in Portuguese, they would say, vamos dar jeito. We'll find a way. We'll find a way to make it work. Because we don't want to push away or forget this soul, this sister in need. And in that moment, the man in the iron mask, the spirit, his obsessor of 30 years, appeared to him and said, Givaldo, you're really going to take this baby in? She's hideous. She's ugly. She's going to require so much of you. Why are you going to bother? Why do you love someone you don't even know? And with all the humility and honesty and love that was Givaldo and is him, told his delightful obsessor, yes, I love her and I will care for her all the days of my life. And that broke the obsessor. That opened a crack in him where he finally gave a little and realized Givaldo was somebody different in this life. And he looked at Givaldo and he said, "You know, Givaldo, that's my mother, reincarnated in that baby." And from then on, that spirit who was his obsessor for 30 years transformed into one of his helpers, a protector, a spiritual security guard, if you will, more or less in these terms, that no longer sought for and watched for his downfall, but now served as a helper for him. Find support in prayer and in work. And in the Spirit's book, the law of work, the law of labor, any good work is work. Anything that is good, that is, it could be any kind, because sometimes we might think, well, if I'm not a surgeon or if I'm not helping millions of people, the trash man, the cook, the janitor at our schools are extremely valuable human beings. All work is blessed work. And lastly, she says, help each other in all circumstances. Help each other in all circumstances. The Spirit's book tells us it is our responsibility to do all the good that we can do, that is within our power to do. So let that sit with you a while, that's our responsibility. And lastly, she says the following: when individuals do not help each other in their own clan, when individuals do not help each other in their own clan, they certainly will not be able to participate in the solidarity program that extends to all humanity. In layman's terms, you would be hard-pressed to find anyone in this lifetime who's unable to find or give forgiveness in their own family. They can't do that bare minimum. It's really difficult, if at all, to find those people have success outside of their family, meaning in everyday life, in society, because Joanna tells us the family is the cell of society. When that breaks down, communities, society breaks down, countries break down. And if we look at countries that are more successful in a moral sense, they have strong family bonds, at least culturally, and sometimes morally. This isn't for us to judge others. It's simply a call for us to do some inner search inside of us, to ask ourselves, could I be more compassionate towards myself and those in my family circle? Could I be more forgiving? And if we don't know where to start, the best place to start is with prayer. Genuine prayer, asking, as we ask, help me to find and to know where my blind spots are. Let me know where I'm not seeing the things that perhaps others are seeing, and other ways that I may be hurting others that I'm not aware of. Folks, as we come to an end of this chat of ours today, we have to recommend some readings. And we shared it earlier. There are too many books to count now in English with great translations. One of the larger publishers, Leal Publisher, fantastic translations, Feb Publisher as well. There's also ones out of New York, SGNY. There's some on our website, SSB. But there's so much in English that we can really gain so much knowledge from, and it's mind blowing. Of course, we always have our handy dandy trusty collection of the five main books of Spiritism, which should always be studied again and again and again and again. But there are these lovely and amazing adjunct literature that's out there. You can get it on Amazon. The fastest way and order through Layout Publisher, through their website directly, but highly recommend. If not these book, pick up another book, pick up something. But reading is so good for us. And I will say, I know some people who don't like reading, there's audiobooks. Great. Lots of audiobooks. There's Audible, which is an app. Even YouTube has a lot of audiobooks, Portuguese, Spanish, English. There's a plethora. And it's great because you can be cleaning your house, listening to an audiobook. You could be driving on your way to work, or you're just, whatever you're doing, you can listen to it. So, our conclusion: living in our family is an opportunity for spiritual evolution. And forgetfulness allows us to begin again. It's like a new beginning. Yes, our emotional memory can affect us, but let's stay focused on loving others and forgiving and educating ourselves, learning more about ourselves, about spirituality through these amazing books, attending your Spiritist center, your meetings and study groups. So friends, hopefully some of this will stick with you and you remember some of this. If nothing else, please go and buy the book, Facets and Patterns of Spirit Obsessions. It is a profound book. It's an easy read. At least I think so. I could be biased. I'm not sure. Again, I could have blinders that I don't know about. So who knows, guys? Don't hold me to it. But I think it's a great book. So friends, thank you. Thank you for those who are watching on the web and who have stayed with us throughout this talk. So at this time, we can take some questions, or folks, you can share comments, things that made you think, and or not. That's okay too. Some of this is just for us to walk away and just think about and reflect about. No questions? Great. All right, moving on. Please.
Hi, I really enjoyed this presentation. A lot of takeaways. One of the questions I had, it's not working? Okay, yes, now it's working. Yeah, I think you heard what I said before. But anyway, so a lot of food for thought, and I'm thinking about what cycle am I in? How do I identify it? Was one question. And then the action items that you told us, and I was connecting that with a situation that's happening to me now, because I can actually apply all the points to resolve the situation. So it's not just something for long term, for a broader perspective, but you can make it granular on a day-to-day basis as well. And I really appreciated that. I took it down on my phone, so I'm going to refer to it in the future.
Excellent. Yeah. Sister Angelica in the book is fantastic. And her advice and her takeaways are phenomenal. Thank you for that. Yeah, your question about how do I find out what cycle I'm in? First, kudos to you for even asking that question, because that's big. That's huge. That's step one, asking the question. And two, I think the easiest way, if I could say easiest, if it really is easy, I don't know, but to pray and ask for guidance. My mic is going in and out. To ask for guidance on where you should begin, whatever cycle that you're in, if it can be revealed to you, or what needs to be, like just ask for general guidance. And Joanna actually says, begin where you are. So where do you find yourself today? What's going on today? What issues are you having today? Start there and build out. You already mentioned something that you're going through, so start there and just go from there. And don't lose momentum. Joanna says, we often can start a good work, but discipline can be tedious and boring over time, and we can tire of it. But stick with it. And if you fall off, forgive yourself and come back. But thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Kirsten.
I think Isabella had a question. No.
Paula online says, necessary teachings. Thank you. Might we not routinely analyze how we are doing on our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels? And then just a follow-up. I think it's more common than a question, which she presented as a question. The next one, she says, some more self-reflections might be whenever we are perturbed, ask ourselves why have I attracted this situation? Whenever we need courage, understand the obstacle is fear, and then ask fear of what? That's the second one, Daniel, if you want to put the second one on.
I'm just rereading it.
Sure. It's more like a comment than that she presents the questions presented to ourselves.
Oh yeah, so for sure, asking ourselves why we are triggered by the things we are triggered by. Why does this particular thing, why does it perturb me? Why does it bother me so much? It's not a question. Oftentimes we focus just on the perturbation, the thing that's triggering you. Like, oh my gosh, that person is speaking so loud. They're just really annoying me. The follow-up question to that should be to yourself, why is this triggering me? Why am I so annoyed? Why am I bothered by this? And it's a question you need to sit with. It's not a question that necessarily you can answer like straight away. It should be something that you should sit with and be really, really honest with yourself. Why is this triggering me? Why is this happening to me? Not seeking to play the victim, but to seek knowledge about ourselves, about where I am at in these steps of life, the cycle of life. So thank you, Paula, for your feedback.
Kirsten, I would like to make a comment. I thank you for the case that you brought and the realization of Felipe when there is an encounter, as the mentor comes and says they need this time. Both of them need to have this time, right? And what came to mind as well with all the cases that we have, and I think all the takeaways that the mentor brings to us, that it doesn't need to get to that point, right? We don't need that moment of realization of we can do so much to perhaps prepare for an encounter like that, but in a much more subtle and where the reconciliation will take place in an easier way, if I may say. Would that be your vision with as well?
I'm smiling here because it's the reality of so many of us in our lives and our experiences, that oftentimes we're seeing the challenges and the situations like Argos and Felipe. It didn't need to come to that. It didn't need to reach that level. And often in that situation, we find ourselves saying, like, we didn't need to reach this point. It didn't need to reach it. But I guess it did need to reach this point because we didn't choose another path. We chose the harder path for ourselves, making things more difficult. So this is the way that it happened. Could they have found peace and forgiveness a lot sooner? Absolutely. Absolutely. But they didn't.
Thank you. Alba then says, thank you, Kirsten, for bringing these reminders. What advice will you have for someone that is currently struggling with forgiving a family member, how she or he can overcome strong emotions of rejection?
Ooh. What advice will you have or do you have for someone that is currently struggling with forgiving a family member? How they can overcome strong emotions of rejection? That's a great question. Well, I can only answer in a very general way, not knowing the specifics of the situation. What advice do you give to someone who's struggling with forgiving a family member? I would say, first and foremost, give yourself some grace. Because obviously, if you feel like you are struggling with forgiving someone, it's likely because you felt you were a victim of them somehow, or they did something against you in some way, form, shape, or form. So you're struggling with that hurt, with that anger, whatever feeling. You have to find out what that is that you're struggling with and try to work through those emotions. And we always recommend, there's these great resources out there in the world. They're called therapists. I don't know why throughout humanity we look at them as something to be ashamed of or something that we don't want to talk about that we see. We always say that nobody ever has a problem talking about seeing a cardiologist or an endocrinologist or a dentist or an endodontist. I just had work. I had to see an oral surgeon. Had no problem telling that to anybody who was asking. Nobody's really asking me, but my boss actually did. But I would really be very unlikely for me to say to my boss, yeah, listen, I need to go set an appointment with my therapist this week because I'm really struggling. Nobody does that. But I will say, I got to mark an appointment with my doctor this week. I got to up my cardiac meds or something like that. There's no shame there. I digress. Back to Alba's question. Forgiveness. It is a journey. And if you're asking about it, congratulations, because you're one step closer to getting it. I'd say if somebody asked me, like, how do I forgive? I'd say begin with prayer, ask for guidance, ask for during your hours of sleep that you can have some form of therapy while you sleep. Why not ask? It doesn't hurt to ask. The worst your mentor can say is no, which most likely I don't think they will say that. And then begin to educate yourself. We have a lot of resources. There's a good book that it's in English and it's not here. I have it at home by Alberto Almeida. And the book is about all about forgiveness, how to forgive, the path of forgiveness. I forgot the actual title. But asking for the strength to forgive, much like Felipe in this book said to Sister Angelica, I don't know if I can forgive. Just, he's being honest. He's being open. I don't know that I can do that because to imagine him happy makes me sick to my stomach. So how can someone that feels that way forgive? They can't. Not immediately, not instantaneously. But with the forgetfulness of the past, of the reincarnation, he's going to have that opportunity. Could he have done it sooner? Sure, had he wanted to, or had he made the decision, had the will, had the desire. And what was her second question? It was, how can they overcome strong emotions of rejection? I would have to ask what the rejection was in reference to, but that we live many lifetimes, that perhaps today we were rejected. Yesterday we were the ones to reject others. To again do a deeper dive into ourselves. Why does that rejection bother you? Ask the question. What is it that it triggers within you? What's the feeling? And go from there. And don't be afraid and don't be scared of what comes up. All right, folks, I think that's all from the virtual side of things. If no one else says anything else, to share, we can move to our moment of passes. And Leo or Daniel.